Hi, I'm Richard Friedman, and welcome to my video cartoon for August 20th, 2025. Here, this is the basically the most important, I figured, excerpts from the summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. I took out the lines from each of them that I thought were most important and most representative of the entire meeting. And there it is here, and I'm going to read that to you in a few minutes. There they were. Russian President Vladimir Putin, U.S. President Donald Trump. And the words here we'll get to. And I also want to here go onward with the introduction here to the cartoon, which is Richard's Trump Putin Alaska Summit's most memorable excerpts, and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's amid landing in Alaska prophetic message. So this is Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who reflects the Kremlin. It's been widely accepted that he reflects 100% the will and the attitude of the Kremlin. And so, as foreign minister under Russian President Putin. So here we have him here, landing in Alaska, wearing that vest here, and under that it says here, basically, he's wearing this USSR shirt. The CCCP shirt that means USSR in Russian. Those of you who remember USSR, you could think back to the Beatles song, "Back in the USSR, boy." You don't know how to remember that. That was the Beatles song. The USSR was like the word that described the United Soviet Socialist Republic, which encompassed a lot of countries in the Baltic area and their spheres of influence, the countries they had over Poland and all these countries that they had influence over. And they really had control over that whole area there, and that was considered the Soviet Union, and that fell apart with the fall of the Iron Curtain in Germany, and from there, and everything. I don't want to go into a history lesson, but I'm going to give you that backdrop to what happened there. And President Putin has said himself that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy in the 20th century. And he's out, and he's determined, in my view, it looks that way, to bring back those days. And here we have Lavrov arriving at the meeting with his USSR sweatshirt. So that's symbolic of that. And here he is. Here he is there. There's Lavrov arriving for the head of the meeting. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov lands in Alaska, sending strong message to Trump before Putin meeting, wearing a CCCP sweatshirt that possibly symbolizes Putin's aim to return to the USSR days. Okay? There he is here. Okay? There he is. Okay? So that was Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in his USSR sweatshirt ahead of the Trump-Putin summit. There he is. Okay? Now, to go back to the introduction here, Richard's Trump-Putin Alaska Summit most memorable excerpts. So I took here the most memorable excerpts here. Okay? And that, again, and that included Sergei Lavrov arriving there, which was ahead of the meeting, which I thought was very important to demonstrate symbolically. Following that meeting, following that meeting, President Trump dropped his sincere, and Putin described President Trump's efforts as sincere efforts to quote Putin, to achieve a ceasefire. So President Trump came into this meeting with the aim in mind of establishing a ceasefire, stopping of killing, stopping of all those killings. We gotta stop those killings. Okay, that was his get-go, and that's what he was coming in to do, to get Putin to agree to that. And he said there would be a lot of consequences to Russia if that was not achieved. He did say something like that. I don't know if it was then or there, but he had mentioned that prior to the meeting. Okay, following that meeting, dropped his sincere efforts, quote Putin, to achieve a ceasefire, and Trump claimed after that to have ended after the meeting. Trump came out with a different story here, and now he says he ended 6 wars without a ceasefire. So he says, well, ceasefire ain't that important after all, because I think back now, I remember I ended 6 wars without a ceasefire, so what the hell, Okay? And on Sunday, Trump said on his social media platform that Ukraine will not regain Crimea, okay? That's absolutely out of the question. We're not occupied by Russia in 2014. And no Ukraine, and that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO. No going into NATO by Ukraine. President Trump made that emphatic. And that here he did that in a tweet here, right here. This was not a tweet, in his social media post on Truth Social. I keep saying that tweet. This was on his post on his social media platform, Truth Social. Okay, and here's how it went. Here is President Trump's Truth Social post, and it went like this: President Zelensky of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight. This is after his meeting with Putin. Remember how it started. No getting back Obama given Crimea 12 years ago without a shot being fired. So he's again here. President Trump is trying to shift the blame back onto former President Obama in a way here. And no going into NATO by Ukraine. Some things never change. Okay. So I think what he meant by some things never change is that President Trump has blamed NATO in an indirect way or direct way in some cases for this war. You see, no going back to NATO, so some things never change. So in my view, it implies that NATO is still going to be a problem to President Putin because of the things they've engaged in or that. And Lavrov also alluded to that in his statements, which I left out here because I'm trying to get to the real essence of it. But Lavrov also, Foreign Minister Lavrov also said that the blame was on NATO for their activities of building bridges in Eastern Europe, stuff like that. But the point here is that this is their fundamental principle here. The Russians, the thrust of their argument is NATO, but really it's to return to the Soviet Union, in my view, and this is a nationalistic effort, and also Lavrov did also say that nationalism plays a great role in what nations do and not ideologies. Okay, so there you have it. So it's nationalism led by Russian President Putin of Russia. Okay, now. Okay, so again, some things never change. And most recently, President Trump appears to be blaming Ukraine. And President Trump said, "It's not a war that should have been started. You don't do that. You don't take on a nation that's 10 times your size." So President Trump here is basically putting the blame on Ukraine for taking on a country that invaded, a Russian invasion. He's blaming Ukraine for taking on a Russian invasion. You don't start. He's saying here, it's not a war that should have been started. You don't do that. You don't take on a nation that's 10 times your size. That's what President Trump. That's a quote. That's his exact words. So he's saying that there was a big mistake for Ukraine to fight back the Russian invasion. They should have never done that. Okay, and he also said that he could have, and if he president, and this goes on in their meeting that I'll get to, that there never would have been a Ukraine war. And I honestly believe the only way you could have stopped that conflict, because the Ukrainians, you see how strong-willed they are and how they fought against all the odds that were against him. The only way you might have stopped it is, and this is crazy, but it's true, the only way you could have stopped it is for the United States to say, okay, if you don't surrender to Russia, we're going to join Russia, and you're going to have the United States and Ukraine invading you, and we'll both invade you. How do you like that? Okay, let's talk a little bit. President Zelensky might have said that, but that's the only hypothetical thing I could imagine in my mind that might have stopped the Ukrainians from fighting back. To take on the United States and the Soviet and Russia at the same time would have been too much. So for them, for Zelensky and for the Ukrainian people. So that's the only scenario I could conceive of that would have stopped them from fighting back. Maybe, and only maybe, I say. Maybe not. Okay, so there you have it. And here goes another thing here. And China, which is about now 10 times the size, now that Russia is 10 times the size of Ukraine, China is 267 times the size of Taiwan. So they should certainly never fight. You can make that same argument. And China, which is about 267 times the size of Taiwan, President Trump said on Friday that Chinese President Xi Jinping told him China would not invade Taiwan while Trump is in office. So that's reassuring to President Trump. He was reassured by President Putin many times until recently. So now he's being reassured by President Xi of China that as long as you're president, no problem. As long as you're in office as president. Okay, there it is. So that was that. Okay, now here to continue along here with the introduction here. Okay, now without a ceasefire, and on Sunday Trump said Ukraine. Okay, I said that. Okay, Putin ended with Russia demanding that Ukraine cede the entirety of its contested and fortified Ukrainian Eastern Donetsk region in exchange for an end to the fighting. So this is what is going on here now. So here you have, this is the map, and this tells it all. So this is the Donetsk area here. You see that? Right here. And there's a lot of pockets. And there's a very fortified area that the Russians haven't been able to break through. And that's holding the country it's been argued that that's been holding the country together. This area of Donetsk is very fortified, and the Russians haven't. So President Putin wants that. He wants that fortified area. And for a ceasefire to occur, he's basically said that the Ukrainians have to surrender that area, which is very fortified. And then then he could have possibly, there'd be a good chance, or that he would give him a ceasefire. So President Trump couldn't go ahead. At the beginning, he was President Trump was talking about territorial swaps and this and that, like in a Monopoly game. I'll give you a boardwalk for Park Place or something like that, like a Monopoly game. But then Zelensky spoke out, and a lot of people did. So Trump backed off from that, and then he backed off from a ceasefire warning with Putin, and now Putin. Because Putin says here, well, we've got to get this fortified area of Donetsk, because that's what's holding the place together. Because if that goes, Ukraine could be split in half. The Russians could split it in half and just conquer piece by piece by piece, and there it goes. That's the whole ball game. So this area is very important. So President Trump couldn't give him a go-ahead on that, obviously. So that's how the meeting. That's the essence of what happened at the meeting, in my opinion, from what I've heard. Or what was reported, let's put it that way. Okay, so after this, okay, I want to get back here to what I'm talking about. So I go in sequence here. Okay, so Putin ended with Russia demanding that Ukraine cede the entirety of its contested and fortified Eastern Donetsk region in exchange for an end to to fighting, basically a ceasefire, as I said, reporting. So this was, now, I have to say this right now, as long as I have the map here. Now, right, I think it was right before the meeting, the Russians, after that, right before that President Trump had his meeting with European leaders and Zelensky, the Russians started attacking big time. Okay, now they attacked these areas here. These are the areas they attacked here. They hit Kharkiv. They hit out west, Lviv. They hit here in Kherson. They hit Zaporizhia. Kharkiv took a big hit. A lot of people, a lot of civilians. Targeted a lot of civilians. A lot of civilian targets were targeted. A lot of things were targeted. This was the biggest attack since the end of July that they launched here. Okay, and that was before and immediately after the meeting. Boom, all hell broke out. Okay, and Putin making his point here that there's not going to be a ceasefire unless he gets those areas of Donetsk that are fortified. And that's it. That's his bottom line point. And he's making that point in all these bombings that he did here. And you can see now he bombed Lviv, which should be another precursor here to the fact that he's interested in the western part of Ukraine too. He ain't forgetting about the totality of the situation here. Okay, and now I go on with, here it is. Now I'm trying to give you. I'm not trying to crucify anybody here. I'm trying to give you the facts, and you decide. I'm doing this as objective as all the bones and all the muscles in my body I use to put it to you this way, so that it's objective. I'm not looking to be a cable channel host or anything like that. Okay, now, not that they're wrong or anything like that, but it's my position here is to give it to you with humor and facts, and you decide. That's my position. I'm not condemning anybody. Okay, I'm giving you the facts. You decide. Okay, Trump caught on a hot mic talking to Macron, saying, "I think he wants to make a deal for me." Trump, Ukraine took on, and then President Trump recently said, Ukraine took on a country 10 times the size. We did that. Biggest attack after the Trump-Zelensky meeting. We saw what happened there. So here is now basically the meeting here. I'm going to read that to you. Okay, and there it is. Here it is. And I'm going to read this. We zoom in on Russian President Putin, and we zoom in on U.S. President Donald Trump. And here's how the meeting went. Okay, here is President Putin. President Putin started it off. He started off with, today, when President Trump said that if he were president back then, there would be no war, I am quite sure that would indeed be so. I can confirm that. We can confirm somehow that there'd be no war if now President Trump were president back then. Okay, and basically saying, instead of Biden, if it had been President Trump, there would not have been a war. So, but President Putin, in my view, here is he's buttering up President Trump because that President Trump already said that. Okay, so again here, and this is what was said on the mic, that President Trump feels that because of him and his relationship with Putin, that war never would have happened, and there it is, and that he feels now that he can work with Putin to end this war because of the relationship that he has with Putin. And we see now, immediately after that, that European conference and after his meeting, boom, all hell broke loose in Ukraine. So President Putin is you decide on that, where President Putin's thoughts are and his actions are. Okay. Now here is President Trump. Here he is. There's President Trump. I'm going to zoom in on President Trump here. Okay, and President Trump says, "We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir." And he said, "With Vladimir, we were interfered with by the Russia hoax. That goes back to Obama and the investigation that Obama did on the elections, concerned about security, about Russia. There was some proof. There was proof that the Russians were trying to influence the election, but never really did or got into the mechanics of it. But President Trump and his people now are making a thing about it. Okay, many points were agreed to. There are just a very few left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. So there it was. There it is. I'll let you just take that in here. There they are. Okay. That was. Okay, that was the meeting. Now, another thing I have to add on here. Again, in the spirit of you're the boss, you decide how you want to think about it. But President Trump, during the meeting with European leaders, said basically that it was cool. Maybe, just maybe, I'm not ruling out American boots on the ground as a security force, as a protective security force in Ukraine, or as added security if Russia should break the deal. I'm not ruling out American boots on the ground. And he said that. Okay. So what happened was that because they used Article 5. Everybody at that European meeting there was very happy that they used Article 5 language, which states that if if one member of NATO is attacked, then all others are obliged to join in. It simply means obliged. They don't have to if they don't want to. It's in Article 5. It doesn't necessitate, but they are obliged to. The United States, because of its position, would be a black eye, two black eyes. So because of the United States' position as a world leader, if we didn't do that, it would be unacceptable. But in the wording of Article 5, they're obliged to. They don't have to. So there's an out there in Article 5, and Article 5 leaves out the United States. They said the Europeans. So President Trump now, with the context of Article 5 language, leaves out America. So Putin ain't worried. He knows that with Marjorie Taylor Greene around, and Marjorie Taylor Greene and the MAGA people, that's the base of President Trump. They're up on arms on President Trump. So next day, President Trump says, no boots on the ground in Ukraine. Ukraine, no join NATO. That's the thrust. That's where he's coming from now. He said, no boots on the ground on that. After I'm sure that a lot of the MAGA people, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, got very upset about that. And there you go with that. And Putin, I'm sure Putin is aware of political realities in America. And so he accepted that language, probably knowing that the Americans won't be there, and all I have to do is Europeans. And even the Europeans said, without America, it just ain't the same, put it mildly. Okay, finally, that's that peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. And that was basically it, folks. I'll just go through that again with you here. This was the meeting. This was the map. Now, you could see here what would happen here. This is Donetsk here, and this is the line here. And if Donetsk falls, and that security force, that defensive force they have in Donetsk falls, you could see that Ukraine could be broken in half from that point here. And these were the cities of Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv, Kherson, and Kharkiv really took a hard hit. Here I got these missiles drawn in here, that I drew these missiles coming in here. And even out in Lviv, there were bad fires out there from attacks. So there you have it, folks. Okay, that's it, folks. Thank you for watching my video. God bless you, and I'll see you next time. Hang in there. Bye.